Thank you for joining us. I'm Richard. On behalf of the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, I want to welcome you all to Beyond the Mall 2021, Making Matters. We look forward to connecting with you on our digital platforms as master artisans, cooks, sculptors, and musicians from as far away as Armenia, Fiji, Peru, and Cuba, right here in Washington, D.C., welcome us into their kitchens and studios to share stories and skills. Together, we'll learn about Zapotec textile dyeing, Senegalese metalsmithing, Korean home cooking, and much, much more. This weekend is a future-facing reflection of the festival's legacy, making community no matter the circumstance, no matter the time. As we have every year since 1967, we offer sincere thanks to all of those who open their creative lives to us, to share with us. And we hope that you take inspiration from their stories and find collective care, particularly this year, in the sharing. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Stories in Stone, Master Artisans on Tools, Technique, and Meaning, part of the 2021 Smithsonian Folklife Festival's Weekend of Digital Programming, Beyond the Mall, Making Matters. Thank you so much for joining us. We are offering live real-time captioning and American Sign Language interpretation during today's live program. To view the simulcast that includes these services, please use the link provided in the comments section. If you are viewing this program after the live broadcast, please note that it will also be made available on our website with closed captioning. My name is Marjorie Hunt, and I'm a curator and education specialist here at the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. This afternoon, we invite you to participate in a conversation on craftsmanship with three extraordinary master artisans who will be giving us a glimpse into the skills and values that shape and give meaning to their work. We'll be taking your comments and questions in the live chat, so please join in. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll try to answer as many of your questions as we can. If you don't know the festival, I encourage you to check out our website at festival.si.edu to learn about our programs, education resources, and more. I also want to give a shout out to the Washington National Cathedral for their promotional support and for co-hosting this event on their Facebook page. And now, please help me welcome our guest. Yay! So we have Joe Alonso. Joe is a master stonemason who has worked at Washington National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. for more than 35 years. First as a stonemason helping to build the west towers of this beautiful 14th century Gothic style building, and now as the head mason in charge of maintaining and restoring the cathedral's monumental stonework. Joe currently leads a team of 3 carvers and masons, including the talented Sean Callahan and Andy Yule, who have been working to lovingly restore the cathedral's exterior stonework since it suffered severe damage from an earthquake that rocked the city in 2011. Next, Nicholas Benson. Nick is the owner and creative director of the John Stevens Shop in Newport, Rhode Island, a continuously operating stone carving shop founded in 1705. As a third-generation stone carver and letterer, Nick designs and carves inscriptions in stone for memorials and public buildings across the country, including the inscriptions for the National World War II Memorial, the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, and most recently, the new Eisenhower Memorial in Washington, D.C., where he worked together with longtime John Stevens Shop master carver Paul Russo and our next guest, Sebastian Martorana. Nick has also worked for many years with Joe, carving inscriptions at the cathedral from time to time. So we have a nice little group here of friends and kindred spirits today. In recognition of his artistic excellence and efforts to preserve his craft, Nick was awarded a National Heritage Fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts in 2007 and honored with a MacArthur Foundation Fellowship in 2010. And last but not least, Sebastian Martorana. Sebastian is a stone carver and sculptor living and working in Baltimore, Maryland. His studio is located in the 150-year-old Hillgartner Natural Stone Company, where he undertakes commissioned stone carving, restoration, and design work, as well as creates his own sculptural pieces. Sebastian's sculpture Impressions was featured in the 40 Under 40 Craft Futures exhibit at the Renwick Gallery of the Smithsonian American Art Museum and is now in its permanent part of the museum's permanent collection. As I mentioned, Sebastian worked together with Nick to carve inscriptions for the Eisenhower Memorial. And you can see some of his beautiful sculptural pieces at the Krieger Museum in the Traces exhibition, which is up until June 30th. So you have 4 days. Welcome, everyone. Joe, Nick, and Sebastian, it's so nice to see you and to have you with us. Thanks, and what I find exciting about today's panel is that while all of you work in stone, in varying degrees of similarity and difference, Joe setting stone, Nick and Sebastian carving stone. What really unites you, what you share in common is a deep mutual appreciation for craft, for beauty and excellence in craftsmanship. And so I think it will really be illuminating to unpack and explore that today during our conversation. And also, I was struck as I was introducing each of you with just how Washington, D.C. is sort of this open gallery of your beautiful work. You've left your mark across the city, and whether it's up the hill at the cathedral or on the National Mall or in the museums and beyond. And what an incredible gift to all of us. So thank you for that. So I'd like to start today's conversation by asking each of you to tell us a little bit about the type of work you specialize in and what distinguishes the kind of work you do in stone. So Nick, let's start with you. Tell us about the work you do at the John Stevens Shop.
The John Stevens Shop, founded in 1705 by the Stevens family, who were over from England, started making headstones pretty quickly back in the colonial era because the mortality rate was so high. They continued on doing so until my grandfather bought the business in 1926, and my father ran the business after my grandfather died, and I then took over in 1993. And so what we do is we calligraphically lay out inscriptions with a broad edge brush on stone. As you can see in this photograph, there's a layout that I did on a piece of slate. There's my father to my right. And then we take mallets and chisels and we carve out the inscriptions the way the Romans did with a V-cut. And I've been doing that for darn near 35 years now. This is the common burying ground right up the street where so many of the old colonial stones that were made in this shop wound up. Really, really interesting. These beautiful old stones were considered to be sort of naive, but really they're much more complicated and beautiful sculptural elements in and of themselves. This is an inscription on the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial in Washington, D.C., where I designed a site-specific typeface and then went down on site and carved the 14 inscriptions that are on the retaining wall there at the memorial. And this is a photo of me carving on the Eisenhower Memorial, which we finished up year before last. Sebastian Martorana was a part of that whole process. And we were doing a lot of the writing here with pneumatic hammers, but then finishing all the letters with a mallet and chisel. So it all turned out really nicely. Thanks, Seb.
Yeah, right. I guess it was good you had some help. Or there's sort of, what, 5,000 letters?
4,483.
Whoa, a lot of stone carving. And Sebastian, what about you? You do quite a range of different stone carving work.
Yeah, I'm pretty lucky never really to do the exact same thing twice. So most of my work kind of oscillates between the more institutional kind of carving like I did with Nick, monuments, memorials, colleges and universities, ecclesiastical work for large churches and synagogues and things like that. And then my own sculptural practice, which is obviously more personal projects and things that are kind of art directed as opposed to working with team like Nick, typographers, designers, architects, things like that. So my studio kind of operates out of Hillgartner Natural Stone here, which while old isn't quite as old as the John Stevens shop. Hillgartner was founded in 1863, largely doing tombstones as well for like Civil War era mortalities. And so now I'm basically their carver in residence here, where I'm working on various commission work and my own work. And what you're seeing there is basically a headstone, which for me is somewhat less common. I don't do a lot of headstones, but for me, I'm able to kind of hopefully bridge the gap between the more sculptural side of my work and the commission side in pieces like that, which are the kind of custom commission pieces.
Yeah. And can you tell us about the piece that was just up, Sebastian?
This one here. So yeah, this is Impressions, and it basically is an illustration of kind of the last image that stuck with me in my head after my wife's father passed away. He passed away in the home from cancer, so it was like a long process, but we were there at the end. And after removing, him from the bedroom, this was basically just the last image I had with me after that of the very soft pillows. And the piece you see here is called Unseen, which is kind of an extension of a series of marble canvases that I've been working on. But basically the idea that behind it is that most sculpture isn't really seen in person anymore, generally speaking, by the people that like it. It's seen through what we're using right now, screens and pixels and things like that. So the idea of the work and the detail of things kind of being covered up or obfuscated by the screen, by the person not really being in contact with the piece itself. So I think of that texture and canvas and the flower sack cloth that it was covered with as being kind of interesting examples of that, things that we see but we don't really see.
Thanks. Beautiful work, Nick and Sebastian. And now on to Joe. Joe, can you tell us about the very particular kind of stone setting that you've been doing at the cathedral for the past 35 years plus?
Yeah, hi, everyone. So the cathedral, I am a stone setter, a stone mason. The cathedrals had, the stone carvers were of separate trade. We were the masons who assembled this building, laid all these big blocks of Indiana limestone. This cathedral is a true load-bearing masonry structure. The stones that you see here, they're big, solid blocks. It's a monumental construction. It's a monumental structure. These are the real thing. Here's a shot of the north side of the cathedral. We're the 6th largest cathedral in the world. You know, you can lay the Washington Monument, 550 some feet inside of the cathedral. This shot's from a couple of years ago when we were doing an earthquake repair phase on the north side. Today, all that scaffolding and crane is gone, but there it is, just a real Gothic style structure that's built in the true Gothic manner. And just a shot of me back in the day. When I came to the cathedral in 1985, we were still constructing the West Towers. So it's just amazing that I got to actually help construct this building alongside some of the old master masons. Here I am standing next to an arch that I was working on up on the West Towers. Again, you can see there that's the real thing, a real Gothic arch. And there's a great shot taken in the 1930s of a stonemason on the cathedral building an arch exactly the way we were then. I mean, it has not changed, and what he's doing there in the 30s hadn't changed from the medieval days. The real load-bearing arches and structure, and these massive stones being laid just the way it's been going on for centuries. And then we had the earthquake on the 23rd of August, 2011, which the cathedral got rocked by this 5.8 earthquake. And it suffered some pretty significant damage on its upper areas, these pinnacles and such. Here's one that rotated and just massive pieces fell off. And fortunately, we were able to dismantle this one, and ever since then we've been kind of back to kind of major construction mode. We'll raise a little bit of money and pick an area on the cathedral to repair, and here I am. We're pulling a big pinnacle off in one of our repair phases, and then that gets repaired and put back together. But I kind of never dreamed that I'd be rebuilding the cathedral again. And here we are, my two colleagues and I, Andy and Sean, standing on one of the pinnacles of the central tower. Again, you can see the structure way up high there. That top of that pinnacle fell off during the earthquake and rotated. And so we've got quite a bit of work ahead of us.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for sharing all that. And it's pretty amazing that you're able to, in this day and age, do that kind of stone setting, and it takes an incredible amount of skill. So all of you in different ways have a deep connection to generations of craftspeople who came before you, to a rich legacy of craftsmanship in stone. Can you speak to this sense of continuity and connection, and what it means to you in your work, and how it inspires the practice of your craft? Nick, can maybe you share your thoughts about this first?
Yeah, certainly. For me, because it's such a long line of progression from the colonial era right up until today, there's an awful lot of depth in terms of what I can refer to inspirationally. The old colonial guys had a very specific approach. They were moving really quickly, producing headstones at a really rapid rate. When my grandfather took over the business in 1926, he sort of slowed things down a bit. He was really a sculptor, and he studied at the Art Students League in New York City. But he was really inspired by so much of that early colonial work, but also looked even further back at Rome and the way in which lettering was developed in Rome using a broad edge brush. And that whole calligraphic tradition was something that he borrowed from that tradition and started producing lettering that was very much of his own, but adhering to those basic principles. I have built upon both my grandfather and my father's interpretation of that. This is an alphabet stone that my grandfather made back in 1947. And this is a perfect example of that sort of Roman style character that he developed to be very much his own. And this is an alphabet stone that my father did, sort of building upon my grandfather's work and putting his own spin on it and very much his own signature. I myself have been trying to find my own voice within the history of these two great masters, my grandfather and my father. This is an alphabet stone that I did back in the late 1980s. So all of these things are constantly evolving in terms of the way in which you look at them day to day, particularly in terms of, as Sebastian said earlier, the influence of the digital realm. There's still so much to look at historically. You can't exhaust that resource. And it's just really, really wonderful to keep delving deeper and deeper into it. So there's an awful lot there to talk about. Here's a great shot of my father and I splitting a piece of slate. This is this amazing material that used to come from Monson, Maine. You can no longer get this material because that specific vein died out. But this was a piece that my grandfather had. And so here are my dad and myself splitting this old piece of stock that my grandfather had, which I then turned into a personal piece of inscriptional work. That's a lot of fun.
That's amazing. When I see that shot, it almost looks like magic. Like, how can you split that without it like breaking into, hundreds of pieces? A lot of skill. So it's fun to see you and your dad still working together. And just quickly, I'm wondering if within the tradition of the John Stevens shop starting, and that's your grandfather there looking over your shoulder behind you. Yeah.
I'm backwards here, so I got to make sure.
If you feel like that you have developed your own personal style or evolved within the John Stevens shop style.
I think all of us, I think Joe and Sebastian and I can all relate to the fact that we're brought up in a very specific tradition. There are very, very clear parameters to the way in which we learn these crafts. And what happens is as you take this process on, you have to make it your own. You have to do things that are comfortable for yourself. And also it can be a little tricky to stand back and get an objective view on that and say, oh, yes, I have my own style. I personally cannot see my own style within the John Stevens shop history and that continuum. My dad has to tell me, oh, no, I can see it. You got your own style. And I say, geez, Dad, I don't see it as much. And I think the same could be said for both Seb and Joe's work. We've got to find our own way through this.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. And Joe, I was just wondering, I was sort of thinking about the sort of century of work going back to 1907 of Masons that you have, to a connection to. Can you speak a little bit about your thoughts on on that legacy that you work within?
Yeah, working on a building such as this that goes back generations. Of course, you had generations of masons, in my case, stone setters, building this structure, and that's constantly there because I'm all over this building all the time, and I'm looking at stuff that was built in the 1910s and 20s, and seeing what those guys did. And me working up on the tops of these towers back in the 80s and now rebuilding the work of these masons from 100 years ago. You're constantly aware the ghosts of these people are all around and looking at the work and the workmanship. And here's a great shot of the high arches of the choir, clear story being built in 1928. Look, and you can see the masons, the guy on the scaffold there on the right and the white coveralls. The masons always wore the white coveralls, and just building those massive arches. I know exactly that spot on the building, and it's really, and what's cool about the cathedral, it has such a great photographic record of, this is what it probably looked like when they were building a medieval cathedral. And to see that I was, 70 years later, building an arch, like that, with the same techniques. It's always there. Yep.
Yeah, and I think you have a sort of a tangible connection to that heritage. Your favorite trowel. Can you tell us quickly just about that story?
Yeah. So this is actually us masons on this building. In this type of stonework, you use what's called a bucket trowel, and that's what this is. You're dipping your mortar out of buckets because you're way up on a scaffold, and you're using these blunt tip trowels as opposed to this kind of trowel, more of a bricklayer's trowel. Actually, this was my dad's trowel. But anyway, this old trowel I found, and I wonder if you can go back to that photo from 1928. So this is the choir clerestory being built. And the photos from you're looking from the outside, but inside, behind those arches, is where the high vaulted ceiling of the cathedral is. And back in the 80s, shortly after I got to the cathedral, we were back there doing something, and I was walking. You can walk above the vaulted ceiling of this building, and down in the bottom where the vaults come out, where the ribbing comes out, I spotted this old rusty trowel sitting down there, and I climbed down there and grabbed it. The handle had rotted off, and but I knew immediately, it's like, wow, look, and this thing is great. It's got the steel on it. I mean, Nick and Seb can talk about, steel and chisels and tools, and this trowel has, such a nice ring to it, and it's shaped and worked so beautifully. You can see the guy that had it originally was a righty like me, but anyway, this became my main trowel in the building of the cathedral, and I still use it to this day. I used it for something last week here on the building. So some mason dropped this back in 1920 something, and there it stayed until I found it.
That's great.
Love that.
Well, yeah, and we've got a question coming up, but I wanted to first from the chat, but I wanted to first ask Sebastian. I know you were able to learn as carving from some of the old traditional carvers and sculptors who were still in the area when you were starting out and apprenticing, and I just wondering if you can briefly talk about this and what it's meant to you in terms of learning to carve,
Well, it's true. I was very lucky to kind of be connected to the cathedral as well. Tangentially, that cathedral was like, the nexus of stone carvers in the area for generations. So the company that I worked for originally, where I was an apprentice, was founded by Harold Bogle, who at one time worked at the cathedral. And then I was the apprentice of Tim Johnston, who was Harold's apprentice. So there's that kind of line there. And a mentor of mine while I was learning to carve, but also really focusing on sculpture, was Constantine Seferis, who was at one time, a head model maker, sculptor, and carver there at the cathedral. So that is, I'm just, a part of that line in a way. And now I'm, in a sense, working at the Hillgartner Natural Stone Company that houses my studio. I basically was very lucky to kind of show up here in Baltimore when I went to the Reinhardt School of Sculpture and kind of found that Hillgartner's longtime, resident carver, Joe Moss, had basically retired, and Joe and Nick had worked together for years on various projects. So, in a sense, we're all a little bit connected in some way or the other.
Yeah, exactly. There's a question in the chat from Kate who says, a frustrating thing about beautiful stonework is that the public can seldom actually touch it. Do you ever think about that? At least, at least we can touch the walls at the cathedral. I'm just, I saw that Sebastian answered, anyone can touch my work if they're sneaky.
I mean, I grew up in the DC area, in Northern Virginia. So my mother, God bless her, dragged me to like every museum in DC because they were free and they were there. And I, showed an interest as a little kid. And I'm not going to say I didn't touch the stone sculptures in the National Gallery and the Smithsonian and the, Hirshhorn, and,
We'll leave it at that.
So,
I know.
honestly, they're stones. They'll be fine.
Yeah,
I mean, if you look, Marjorie, if you go into the East Building of the National Gallery of Art, my dad carved all of the sort of patrons' names there and all of the recognition inscriptions. And I.M. Pei's name has been touched so many times that the surface is actually polished. It's Tennessee marble, and everyone says, "Oh, why don't they clean the wall? The I.M. Pei's name is all greasy," and it's like, no, it's not greasy. It's actually physically polished to a darker stone, to a darker surface. So it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it tells you where people are looking. If you
It
look
does.
at that pillow, I mean, don't tell Helen, but that you can see the corners of that pillow in the Renwick have gotten some attention.
Yeah, right. That's great. Well, let's delve into, people are saying such great connections to the past and bringing them into the future, and that's so true. So, Joe, Nick, and Sebastian, all of you are incredibly accomplished masters of your craft, and often I think that when someone excels at doing something, they can make it look easy, and people don't realize the huge amount of the depth of experiential knowledge and the years and years of finally honing one's abilities and skills. And so I'm wondering if you could give us a sense, a little bit of the sense of the skills and knowledge of tools, of raw materials, of technique that you bring to your work and that inform the decisions that you make about how to go about approaching any given piece. So I know that's a big question, but maybe, for example, Nick, I was thinking about your knowledge of the characteristics and limitations of different kinds of stone and how that determines both how you design for that stone and also your choice of tools and technique for carving it. And I thought maybe you could enlighten us a little bit about that.
Yeah, most definitely. Oftentimes people ask me, well, when you get involved with these large civic memorials, do you have a say on what type of stone they use? And oftentimes I do. I can say, okay, look, if the inscriptions are going to be X height and we're going to try and cover X space, and we're going to be dealing with a certain viewing distance, and I'm given, say, 4 or 5 different types of stone to choose from, that's really, really helpful for me. I can then say, hey, ideally what I'd like to use is X material because I know it's going to work for these specific parameters. I think that's the case for all of us. I mean, I know that for Sebastian, carving the complex folds and things like that into pillows, that specific marble he's carving is really, really suited to the task. The same can be true to the way in which Indiana buff limestone works for Joe and the guys over the National Cathedral. You have such an incredibly intimate knowledge with this material when you work with it. And oftentimes people will come to me and say, well, what kind of materials can I choose from? And I'll say, well, I use a specific group of materials that not only I know how to work with, but I know stand the test of time well. And I trust the quarries that I work with, and I know these people are going to give me the best possible stone I can get. So this is the windowsill here in my shop with a bunch of our tools, steel mallets, brass mallets, steel hammers. As you can see, I've got a slight organization issue. I'm a little uptight, but yeah. So here's a photo of me carving on the National World War II Memorial. We carved with pneumatics there to speed that whole process up. It was a lengthy bit of carving, but this material that we used, Kershaw granite, the pneumatics worked really well with that material, and the scale of the letters worked very, very well also. So again, I didn't have a real choice in this particular instance, but architects can be very, very aware of what I need to do in terms of getting a decent material to carve. This is the Visitor Center, Capitol Visitor Center down in DC, and that's some Aquia Creek stone, which carves really, really beautifully. all cut with mallet and chisel. So that turned out beautifully.
And do you use different kinds of mallets for different types of stone, say for slate and
absolutely.
granite? Or
this is a mallet that I used when I was really young. This used to belong to my grandfather, and this is one that my dad lent to me when I was learning how to carve. It gives a pretty soft blow, and he knew that while learning, I wasn't going to absolutely destroy the material, the stone, by smacking it too hard with a heavier hammer. This is a much more dense wood. This is a lignum vitae, which is a really, really dense hardwood. And my father made this mallet for me one Christmas, and I was really, really psyched to receive this mallet from my dad. Again, slate and marble carving, it's perfect. This is a zinc mallet, which I use most often these days. Zinc it's very heavy, but it has very soft blow, kind of like a dead blow hammer. You can move the material quickly, but you don't concuss the material so severely. Sebastian has a really great story about not having used zinc and then coming down to work with us on the Eisenhower Memorial and understanding that he really had to use a zinc mallet in order to follow up with the type of finish that we were getting on our letters. Yeah,
we're getting some great questions in the chat, but first following up on that, I'll turn to Sebastian. Sebastian, maybe you can talk about your zinc mallet and what you discovered when you went to work on the Eisenhower.
Yeah, I learned very, very quickly that metal matters, and I had never used zinc before or any mallet other than steel. So I showed up on site with a heavy solid steel and a hollow core steel mallet. And what I realized is, as Nick said, the steel is so much harder and the hollow core has so much more pop to it that it really shatters the crystals of the stone as you're carving through. And sometimes that's the look you want for something, and that's great. But for me to work as part of the team there, I really wanted to make sure that the letters I was carving were not only formatively like theirs, but also had the same texture. So the chop stroke that I was able to achieve with these mallets was just different than what they were getting with the zinc, which has much more push than it does pop because the metal is softer. So I made sorry, I had to make, because you can't just like pop on the Amazon and buy zinc mallets, both of these to kind of figure out the weight that worked best for me, because I needed to have the same type of metal pushing my chisel as Nick and Paul did there. Otherwise, it really just wasn't possible for me to make letters that were going to really look like the letters they were making.
Yeah, that's really great. And we're going to come back to a couple of your other tools. I want to take some questions in the chat. And also, Joe, your background is so amazing. Is that a photograph? Or is that can you show us?
No, that's the real thing. Where I'm on a balcony. I'm on the south tower of the cathedral, and there's a balcony that lines up with these flying buttresses. It's one of my favorite views in the cathedral. That's why I chose it. And we're back here. Look at that. I love this shot of the rows of the flying buttresses with the stained glass windows, and you got the big central tower in the background. And let's see if I whip my computer around. We're looking way up an arch here. But no, I'm in the tower, and it's for real. Ooh, look at the clouds today. So anyway, yeah, that's what's so amazing about this building. You're just inspired when you're in it all day long. This cathedral, I always say, it's just a giant piece of sculpture.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. For sure. Thanks, Joe. Well, we'll come back to you on that. There's some questions. Let's see. Question from Grace. What's something that you always look for when looking at other artisan stonework? That's a good question. When you're, any of you want to?
Well, as a mason, for me, as opposed to Nick and Seb, who are more on the artistic end of things, I just like to look at the precision in which a wall is built. I'll go around and I'll, the old Mason term, you throw your eyeball on it, you sight down a wall, you sight up a corner, And you just see how well that was built, and you could just you look at, gosh, they did a great job on the layout, and so those are the things that I like to look for on big stone buildings.
I should mention here, Mark, that I came to see Joe and Andy and Sean a couple of years ago while I was.
No, it was last year.
Was that last year, Joe?
Yeah, man, it was last year up on the scaffold. Yeah.
So I came up on the scaffold with those guys, and it was really cool because they were doing a lot of Dutchman work, which is work where stone is damaged, and then they cut out a piece, and then they marry in a new piece of stone and fill out what was damaged with this patch. And it was cool to see these beautiful, beautiful Dutchmen that you guys were working on, Joe, and the consistency of the way in which the original work was then imitated and carried on through with these Dutchmen. They really worked beautifully, really seamless.
Yeah, that area was built. That area that we were working on last year was built in the 1920s, and yeah, no, Andy and Sean get all the credit. They are able to duplicate, exactly what that carver did all those years ago, and like Nick says, it's seamless. Yep.
Yeah,
really,
amazing craftsmanship.
Really pleasing to see.
So, heading back to Sebastian, we actually talking about those zinc mallets. We have a nice little short video of you actually using your new zinc mallets that you fashioned for the Eisenhower job. I don't know if we can cue that up. Yeah, so they did the trick. But Sebastian, I've really loved and learned a lot from your Tools Day Tuesday post on Instagram that you put up sometimes, and learning about your thoughts on the importance of the right tool for the job, and often making your own tools. And I think that brings up this whole thing that all of you share, is this great ingenuity and problem solving that comes with the work and the craft. And it'd be great to hear about a custom mall set that you actually made to solve a particular problem you were having with working a particularly super hard type of stone.
Yeah, that's what these are here, which are kind of behind me. Basically, the maul set is a set of hammers that are meant to be struck against one another. So in this case, we have a straight peen. That means the blade is in line with the handle. And this one is a cross peen, which means it's at 90 degrees to the handle, but they're meant to set one against the stone and strike the other with it. And basically, I was working on some stone, a 2.5-ton boulder I have sitting over here. And the stone is a gabbro diabase, which basically is a little bit harder than granite. So it was actually destroying my carbide tools. So I had to move away from using those altogether. And then even the chisels I was using, basically I was slowly destroying my own hands by holding the chisels against the stone to break off large chunks of it. So I wanted a set of things where I could basically set one blade either direction against the stone and strike it. And that's what I was doing here. But I didn't quite have the right things. The things I could buy, again, more easily weren't tempered in the right way. So I was lucky enough to have a local blacksmith offer to work with me to help me make a custom set. So I could design the angles of the blades, which you can see here are very narrow in both cases. And in this one, it's very flat across the top, which means I can get the angle very tight against the stone so that I'm passing more force directly across the stone rather than in the stone. Because there's no point in putting the force into the stone. You could just break the stone or waste your energy. So Nick Irie was good enough to let me come into his blacksmith shop, create some drawings, and kind of figure out the best possible solution to the problem, and then temper the steel of the tool itself. So instead of having a carbide tip, which would be shattered or rendered out of the stone, the metal itself changes in density from highest, most rigid to softest here on the striking face.
Hey, thanks, Sebastian. I think we've got a couple of videos, very short, that it can show them in action.
Nice. Stuff.
That did the job. Those are cool. Those are really cool. Well, yeah. Joe, I know you've got some special tools that you work with to set, the really huge, heavy, several ton stones that you work with at the incredible heights that you have to set the cathedral. There's things that you have to take into account. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about some of the tools and techniques that you use.
Yeah, the type of stone that this cathedral is built of, and the way it's built, these large blocks, monumental blocks, we stone setters, stone masons, you're setting the stone with a rawhide tip mallet. These mallets have heads. Here's a new one of compressed. This is almost brand new rawhide heads on this one. But as you use the mallet to pound these stones into place, the heads, you see the rawhide begins to soften and smash up, which is actually nice. When they're new like this, they're very bouncy. This is at its perfect stage right now. You can deliver a good solid blow to the stone. So the way we do this here, we spread the mortar, and the stones on the cathedral, all the joints between these stones are 1/4 inch. Everything has to work out dimensioned for 1/4 inch joints. So in order to maintain that 1/4 inch joint, you use shims in between the stone. You can't just lay that stone on a bed of mortar, especially a 1,000-pound, 500-pound piece of stone. You have to use shims to hold them up to maintain that proper joint thickness. And the cathedral's roofs are made out of lead, sheet lead, and what we make are these lead shims. We call them buttons. You take these the sheets of, we always have had lead sheets laying around here, so you roll these sheets of lead into these little buttons. I'm kind of rolling a little lead button right now, and that's what you put between the stones. And the nice thing about lead, so you make them a little more than a 1/4 inch, and as you lay the stone in that bed of mortar, you can strike it with this rawhide tip mallet, and it delivers a good solid blow to the stone. And the lead, the little lead button, the little lead shim, you put 4 of those if it's a square block of stone. The lead gives just enough so that you can then level the stone. Of course, you got to level it with your level and your plumb. And by delivering a good solid blow, you are setting the stone. So that's where the term, you're a stone setter. You're not just stacking these stones one on top of another on the cathedral. You're setting them in place. You're compressing them onto the mortar bed. And the lead shims allow for, if you have to tweak it a little bit, the lead gives and keeps it off the mortar. And you have to work quickly. The mortar sets up, sucks all the water out of it, within a minute. So you got about 1 minute to get that stone where you want it. And, we use our levels and I love a good old stick rule. We've got all kinds of fancy measuring devices now, but, there's nothing like a good stick rule that I like to use. And then plumb bobs, for dropping a plumb line. You go up, 100 feet, you can't just stack one on top of another, using your level. Next thing you know, your wall goes out of whack. So this is an old brass plumb bob that was given to me by an old mason, and it's a wonderful old plumb bob. It's full of lead, so it's very heavy and dense. So anyway, just some of the old tools and techniques that have been passed down that require, for this type of stonework that you got here to be installed.
And That brings me to a question from the chat about how are you as craftspeople, how are you passing along these skills and mentoring, and it sort of pairs with a question that I had about your thoughts on the future of the craft and on the next generation coming up.
My daughter's learning how to carve, which is pretty cool. So I don't know if you have that photo, Marjorie, but there's a fun photo of my daughter carving. Yeah, there she is. She's got her ear pods in. You know, she's like perfect X-Gen person, pecking away with a mallet and chisel right behind me, literally right behind where I'm sitting right now. So that's wonderful to have her carrying it on, sort of fourth generation Benson. Whether or not she'll stick with it is yet to be determined. But that's one way of passing it on for me. But as probably with Sebastian and Joe, you know, we'll get involved with a bunch of different sort of symposiums and things like that where you know, we can pass some of this knowledge along. I'd like to do more teaching if I can, but I'm just a little too busy to do that in any really significant way right now.
You know, I've heard you all, speaking of sort of the future of the craft, I've heard you all speak very eloquently about the importance of preserving the traditional techniques, tools and techniques of your craft, and of the value of handcrafted work, sort of the human touch of the craftsperson's hand and over the machine made, and why that matters in this day and age. And I was wondering if each of you could share your thoughts on this with you. Nick, so, you know, I've heard you say that sometimes, or that some people don't see the value in what you're doing. They'll say, isn't there a faster way, an easier way? Why are you doing it like this? You know, what's your answer to this? You know, so what drives your passion for doing the work the way you're doing it?
Well, I got to say, just the very quick sort of glib response oftentimes on site is when someone asks, isn't there a machine that can do that? And I always say, yeah, you're looking at it. But just in terms of people understanding the value in what we're doing, there is a quality to the work that is inaccurate. It's not perfect, and that is the sort of the soul of the humanity that comes out in the work. No matter how refined our stuff gets, there's always a level of inaccuracy, this sort of soul of the human injected into these pieces. And people understand that on a subconscious level. You know, they see beautiful made things. This is why people keep running over to Europe. They want to go over and they want to see Europe. It's such a beautiful place. Why? Because it's all handmade. That's why. So, you know, Sebastian and Joe can chime in on this.
Yeah, Sebastian, your thoughts? Is there enough demand for handcrafted, hand-carved work, and how does that affect supply? Like sort of young people, by supply I mean sort of young people wanting to come in and learn and feel like they have a career in it. And yeah, and again, going back to the original question, your thought of why the humanity of the human made and why that matters.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. I think that intention and expectation matter. You know, I tend to look at it from the lens that I came to stone carving from, which is like wanting to make things artistically, wanting to make sculptures. And I think that the intention matters because you can't separate the concept of the piece from the craft of the piece. The two are wedded. So it's not fundamentally the same piece if it was made by a CNC machine and maybe finished up by a person with a rasp. I think it is fundamentally different, and it matters that someone went through the process of taking that thing from block to finish with their own hands and their own brain. So I don't think those two things are separate. Now, not everybody shares that opinion. You know, some people will say, well, the form is the thing that it is. And if it was made by a CNC machine or a robot or whatever, it doesn't matter. And I just fundamentally disagree. And I think that, as Nick said, it depends a lot on the experience of the viewer. If the viewer cares. If the viewer doesn't care, then it may not matter. And so I think that, you know, it's a good question. Is there a lot of demand for this kind of stuff? I don't know. You know, certainly there are instances where it's being engineered out. But I think we've been fortunate enough to be stay busy, that there is enough demand in the areas we're at to, keep us busy and employed. If you can't be good, be rare. So far, so good.
So, Joe, I know at the cathedral, you and the other craftspeople there were given the time to do quality work. They encouraged you to do the best, to have a high standard of craftsmanship. And what has that meant to you personally, as a craftsperson, as a builder, and to the end result of the structure, to be encouraged to keep a high standard in the craft as you work on that building?
Yeah, when my first day here in 1985, the man who hired me, the legendary stonemason here in DC, Billy Cleland. Billy was the master mason at this cathedral for 30 some years prior to me, and an incredible stonemason who on my first day said, take your time and do it right. And I was like, huh? Coming from the commercial world of stonework and then the go. And no, it was amazing to hear that. And, it doesn't mean you're going to spend all day fiddling with one piece of stone, but knowing that we, again, being surrounded by this building, the craftsmanship, the excellence, you had to do it right. And as you learn this and as you, get more proficient, you can work efficiently and quickly, but still do the job right. And that's always inspired me here. And, this is the kind of building that it's not some office building that's going to depreciate in 30 years and get torn down. It's here, for thousands of years. So, again, having that there all the time, that's just the whole building is the inspiration.
Beautiful. Well, we're coming to the end of our time, so I'd like to close, I guess, by asking each of you in turn what you value most about your work, what you find the most rewarding. Maybe Nick, you could start us off.
I think every day I come into my shop, I sigh and I say, God, thank God I work in this place in a funny cubicle. But that being said, it is demanding. It requires a lot of concentration, and all of us, Joe, Sebastian, and myself, we all set our own standards, and we set them high, and we love what we do. I mean, it's a really, really, really enjoyable work, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here I am standing in front of one of the walls at the Eisenhower Memorial. It's a joy. Someone asked me at one point, do you love your work? And I said, it's more than that. I love it. I hate it. I'm driven by it. It's my life. It is all. Mm-hmm. That's all I've got to say about that.
Thank you, Nick. That's incredible. And Joe, how about you?
Yeah, just the fact, again, this is a building that inspires people. You're walking through the cathedral and you see people, whether they come in and some are religious, it inspires them from a religious perspective. Others, they're inspired by the architecture. They may not believe in anything, but again, this building inspires people in many ways. And to be a part of a building like this that's going to be here a long time. Here I am on top of the very tippy top of the central tower early one winter morning, and again, just being surrounded by the work of so many generations, it's an incredible honor.
Thanks, Joe. And let's see, Sebastian.
Yeah, I think it's the making of the things and actually spending the time and enjoying what we do, making artwork that hopefully rewards people looking really hard. So it does matter about the time that we put into those things. I had other things to say about longevity and staying power, but I think Nick actually got it there. It's something I didn't think about till just he said it. It's true that I have like an amazing home because of my wife. I have an amazing home to go home to every day, but truly I have to tear myself out of here every day. I have to set a timer and remind myself, Sebastian, you got to go. You got to get out of here. You got to pick up a kid and you got to, dinner's at thus and such a time and you've got to go. And I'm so lucky that I genuinely, even if it's a project I don't like, which occasionally occurs, I really don't want to leave here every day. And not a lot of people can say that about their work. And there he is. and moments like that. That is
Yeah.
my eldest at the Eisenhower.
Oh. Wow. Well, this has been such a great conversation. And Joe, Nick, and Sebastian, thank you so much. Heartfelt thanks for being with us and sharing your insights and experiences with us. It's always such an inspiration to hear from you and to talk with you. Thank you to our wonderful audience for joining us. Thank you for watching and listening, commenting, and such great questions. I want to close by offering thanks to our awesome behind-the-scenes team of festival staff, interns, and fellows: Elisa Huff, Sarah Rothman, Jenny Maycock, Diane Nutting, Sabrina Lynn Motley, Sloan Keller, Jason Morris, Maya Cassidy, and Joelle Jackson for their production, promotion, and administrative efforts in support of this program. It really does take a village. And special thanks to the Washington National Cathedral for co-hosting this event on their Facebook page. You can follow the Smithsonian Folklife page here on Facebook to get notifications about future events, and also find us on Instagram and YouTube, and of course, visit our website. The Beyond the Mall Making Matters digital festival continues tomorrow with more exciting programs, including story circles on Senegalese metalsmithing, DC music, and Korean ginseng chicken soup. And you can see the full schedule on our website at festival.si.edu. And also check out our fabulous festival marketplace, where you can get 20% off through the end of June. We hope to see you back soon. And if you've missed any of our programs or want to see them again, you can always view them on our website anytime. Thank you, everyone, and take care.
Thanks, Marjorie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marjorie. Thanks, everyone.